I think that's true. Like, I always think people really underestimate the advantage of improved workflow and how important that is as a competitive differentiator. And people try to create great features or killer functions. And what they don't realize is most of the software that succeeds, it just makes people's lives easier and saves time, and it's just workflow improvements. And I think that you're right. That was a key, huge advantage that you had.
Yeah, no, most definitely.
And we are thrilled to have one of the best CEOs, literally the best CEOs in the country, joining us on the Contrarians. Car sales boss Cam McIntyre, who joined Car Sales way back in 2007 as CFO. I think it was CFO, wasn't it?
It was CFO, yeah.
When the business was far smaller than it was today, after spending 5 years as a finance director at Census, then of course owned by Telstra. Cam took over as CEO from legendary car sales founder Greg Roebuck in 2017 and has completely destroyed my point that you should never sell a company when a founder leaves. Cam has been an absolute superstar CEO, and the Car Group share price has risen from $10 when he took over to a remarkable $37 now, meaning Cam has presided over a four-bagger in a mere 7 years and has grown to become probably one of the most respected CEOs in Australia. Cam, welcome. Let's go back to 2007 because I know we've talked about this and I'm fascinated by this. So how big...
Are you going to let him say hi?
We'll say hi in a second. We'll say hi in a second.
No, say hi.
We'll say hi when he answers the question.
He's not letting you say hi. No, I'm just here as an all part of the audience.
You'll come in a second. So when you joined Car Sales in 2007, tell us a bit about the scale of the business. What were you walking into? We were in this magnificent orifice in... is orifice not work? No, orifice not work.
That's a word. I used to use that word a lot when I was a doctor.
Yeah, edifice.
No one felt good on the other side being a patient when I used that word. I'll give you that as a tip.
In this magnificent building with thousands of employees and huge market cap. What was it like 2007? You rock up from Telstra into this car sales business.
It was a bit different to the orifice we've got today. I'll give you the tip. No, look, we were in a little shop front in Oakley, on Atherton Road in Oakley, and sharing the space with ACP magazines. And there was Greg and I argue about how many people were in the office, but there were so many people in the office that people were sharing offices, and it was lots of fly infestations everywhere, and we'd get the occasional water leak that would flood the ground floor in the building. But look, it was cool. It was just a great place to be. Lots of fun. Everything was going fast. As a business, I think, in those days we were probably doing $30 million of top line and about $15 million of bottom line, and
that's a profitable business.
Yeah, totally good margin, right? I mean, talking about margins, but it was a fast-paced business with plenty going on, but significantly smaller scale.
So you came from a big business in Census. It was a huge business back then. I think before that you worked for Asa Abloy, a big engineering business. What made you go to this fledgling little... Obviously, car sales now is a different scale. Back then, it was a tiny business. We call it a startup still.
Yeah.
What made you go to this little startup from Europe? You were doing well at Census, flying. How did Greg convince you to join?
I'll give you the short answer. The short answer is there's a book, right? And the book is called Our Iceberg is Melting, right? And it's written by a guy called John Cotter. And John Cotter is a lecturer at HBR, HBS Harvard Business School. And I was lucky to do a course there back in 2006. Anyway, he did this lecture. End of the lecture, he says to everyone in the room, there's about 60 people in the room, any questions? One guy puts his hand up and says, yeah, I got a question, John. If there's one piece of advice that you've got for us, what would it be? And his advice was, life is short, do something cool. I was 35, Telstra's a big business. I wanted to do something cool. And we'd spent a lot of time at Census looking at strategy, looking at where digital marketplaces were going and how they're potentially going to be disruptive. You remember the old days, Google, Schmoogle, Sol Trujillo. And car sales was something we looked at. And I loved the business. It was great. And the phone rang one day, said, come down, have a chat. And first interview with Greg was awesome. Second interview with Greg was at the pub, even better. And that was it. So it was clearly a good decision.
So talk us through the journey. So you started, it was $30 million business. How long till you guys listed? Because I think you were like an unlisted public company for a little while from memory, and you had a really interesting shareholder base. I think you had publishing and broadcasting on there. So James Packer's business on there.
And dealers, weren't there heaps of dealer shareholders?
Yeah, and there still are a lot of dealer shareholders. So public company means, as you guys know, you got to have over 500 shareholders, and we probably had about 520 or something like that. But it's the worst possible structure you can have because you've got all the compliance and none of the liquidity. And
it's an unlisted public company.
Unlisted public company, clearly, yeah. And so, yes, PBL Media came onto the register 2015, I think it was. I may be 12 months out there, but we acquired their ACP Magazine's digital businesses. They ended up taking a controlling stake in the company.
So you said 2005?
It was 2015.
Oh, 2015.
Sorry, what I'm saying, 2005. Yeah, 2005, yeah. And they took a controlling stake in the business. We'd agreed, or the chairman of the board had agreed, that we would IPO the company at some stage so that our shareholders could get some clarity around the value of the stock and trade it. And then you know what happened in 2008, right? I mean, it landed right on us. Hey?
It wasn't the best time.
No, it was terrible. It's called the GFC and the global financial crisis. We literally got halfway through our prospectus. We're implementing ERP systems and dropping in all this governance stuff, and the GFC brought it all to a complete stop until 2009.
So it's weird because you think you guys, REA and Seek, the three big platforms in Australia, are all roughly the same vintage, but those guys listed well before you. So I think Seek was 2003 to 4. I think REA was even maybe earlier. But you guys sort of held back for quite a while and were almost the tortoise and the hare story. So you guys obviously gone way past Seek now. REA is just its own beast, but with its different the way it charges its customers. But so you guys have been this incredible story where you're slower to start, but have just gained momentum every year. Can you talk us through the growth journey initially and then the international story, which has really been the story of the last 5 years? But you went from 30 million in 2007 when you joined. Yep. When you listed, what kind of scale were you? And then come to 2015, how much had you grown?
Yeah, I'd say, it's hard to remember back in 2009, but we would have probably been close to $100 million of top line. Today we're about $1.1 billion, so it's changed quite a bit. Look, I mean, in the early days, the growth drivers were about building out our core competencies. So we were strong in the dealer segment. You had some great dealer customers that had all their inventory listed. Then we moved into private sellers because buyers of cars are also sellers of cars, and that made a lot of sense to us. We moved into that, and that took off because rather than have to ring up the Age on a Friday and stick in your 2-line ad and hope sell a car on the Saturday, the ad was there forever, and it was a national audience and not just a Melbourne audience. So it worked. And then from there we moved into media. OEMs wanted to advertise because we had lots of car buyers. And then we realised we had lots of data, and we bought a data business with it called Redbook. And that was really the core growth story. And then from there you go, well, if you can sell cars, well, it's only half a step away from selling boats and bikes and trucks and other things. So we then went into multi-verticals as well, and that was the domestic business. And we probably around about, would have been 2010-ish, I guess we came to the conclusion that we've got lots of cool IP, and Australia is a small market. We do call it 1.2 million new cars here and about 3.5 million used, and there's some much bigger markets overseas. And then we've decided that, let's start having a look at international markets where they're much higher growth, much larger scale, and we can really deploy some of our cool kit. And I guess that's where we've been since.
Why do you think in Australia? I mean, you can tell me if this is unique to Australia. I won't get you talking about monopolies or quasi-monopolies because you won't enjoy that. But why do you think that it's hard for a second platform in any of the key categories to really get significant traction in Australia? It's true for employment, probably even more so than any of them, although Adam always talks about LinkedIn. REA's kind of got Domain. It's worth, a 10th or a 15th of the value. Who's your biggest marketplace competitor in Australia?
Oh, we've got lots of competitors.
I'm sure you do. I'm sure you do.
Competitors.
You probably don't talk about your market share too much.
No, we don't. I mean, we don't. We just stay focused on our consumer and our dealer and making sure we're delivering them great value. But now, look,
why is it hard to compete? Is it just the network effect, or is there something more?
It is the network effect. I mean, he who has the most things for sale generally wins, right? And yeah, that's where it starts. And if you're providing your consumers with a great experience and they're doing what they're on the site to do in the first place, which is buy and sell vehicles in our case, you're delivering that and you're delivering it as seamlessly as you possibly can. I mean, that begets more audience, which begets more inventory, and it's, as you say, it's that virtuous cycle.
So that's a great flywheel. And then, but that was kind of a setup question to ask you this question, which is, why did you win? Because there was Drive in the early days, which was a Fairfax business. It was effectively the business that they funneled all of their ads into, I thought. And so how did you beat them? Because you ended up to be the larger player.
Yeah, I don't think there's one reason behind that. I think there's probably many. I think, if you reflect back on those businesses, and Fairfax, a great business, they were a print originator. Yeah, they made lots of money in print, and print was worthwhile protecting. I mean, where I came from, Census, we were directories, yellow pages, white pages. We made lots of money out of that, and to digitise it, you don't make the same amount of money. So if you can slow that progression down, then that's not a bad thing. But if you've got all these pure digital disruptors that are coming in that have got integrations with your customers, taking the friction points out of the process for your customer and making it easy, building an audience underneath that's not, as I mentioned before, a state or a city-based audience, it's actually a country-based audience, then that's a pretty good place to be, and it's a pretty difficult place to defend. And I think, if you reflect back on those days, that was probably the key takeout. You're best in that situation to try and disrupt yourself. Otherwise,
so that's what I was going to ask, because effectively they were killed by the counter positioning and the rivers of gold that they had, they didn't want to disrupt. And Jeff Bezos was famous in that he got his best guy and said, go and run this ebooks thing and go and destroy the core Amazon business. And do you think that if Fairfax would have done something like that, ultimately that would have been the right decision? Or do you think they were right to protect for as long as they could the incumbent rivers of gold? Like when you look back on it, because sometimes the right thing to do is to protect the rivers of gold. And one of the famous stories is that Kodak probably did the right thing to protect their rivers of gold in film business, right? Because they didn't really have a competitive advantage on the chip side of things. And so what do you think about that?
Yeah, it's a great question, and no one will ever know the answer to that question. I guess, if we were to think about it as car sales, I don't think we have a fear of disrupting ourselves, because we would rather do it to ourselves, the Jeff Bezos model that you mentioned, than have someone do it to us. I think ultimately, as you said, business like Fairfax with Drive, that was a pretty powerful masthead under the age, and potentially if they had disrupted themselves, it would have been a different story. But in our case, because of where we came from originally, which was a dealer platform, a DMS system, we had all the integrations with our customer base from the get-go, which meant we took all the hassle out of getting inventory online. So it would have been more challenging for them. I'm sure they could have probably done it, but that first mover advantage is pretty critical.
I think that's true. Like, I always think people really underestimate the advantage of improved workflow and how important that is as a competitive differentiator. And people try to create great features or killer functions, and what they don't realise is most of the software that succeeds, it just makes people's lives easier and saves time, and it's just workflow improvements. And I think that you're right. That was a key, huge advantage that you had.
Yeah, no, most definitely.
That's Atlassian's story. That's ServiceNow's
right.
story. That's a
That's
bunch
right.
of great businesses that have. I'd love to talk about almost every Australian business stuffs up going overseas. Like there's a laundry list. I'm taking out the Canvas and Atlassians who are born global. Look at almost every Australian business who's tried to go, and Seek's a classic example. Real estate's a classic example. Real estate did that disastrous iProperty buy. You guys have been unbelievable at buying stuff overseas, and almost everything you've touched has turned to gold. I think the Korean acquisition and the Auto Trader acquisition, two that come to mind. Can you talk us through both of those. I think the Auto Trader one, you were pilloried for, you paid too much. That's turned out to be another masterstroke. And the Korean purchase, which I think was always looked like a great purchase. Can you talk about the process you guys went through in these acquisitions and how has it gone from just an overall perspective for the business?
Yeah, no, so, I mean, we've always had a great Australian business, as I mentioned before. We felt that we had great IP that we could push out into international markets. And it was a question of finding which markets would work for us. And that's a pretty critical decision. I wouldn't say that it was terribly scientific to begin with, but we were super conservative, right? And that meant that we were never going to bet the farm on any one transaction. It was always going to be around slowly. Let's take small steps, understand markets, understand the opportunity. And for me, the most important thing is understand the leadership in the business that we're looking to acquire. Do they have the same values? Do they have the same strategic thinking process that we do? Do they see the same opportunities that we do? And then move forward slowly from there. Look at where your synergies are going to be, and look at how you're going to add value. Once you've done that, then assuming the opportunity arose, and it has for us on a couple of occasions we can talk about, then you've got the knowledge, you've got the management team behind you, you know where your IP is going to be deployed, and you can run really hard and fast, and you can be super confident about how you're going to execute on that. And I think for us, that's been our approach. Never put all your eggs in the one basket. Look for markets that are high growth, look for where you can deploy the IP and the tech. Great leadership, great strategic alignment, take a small steps, don't bet the farm, and then progress.
What's the hardest part of an acquisition in your experience?
Look, I think the hardest part is making sure you get all of those things lined up. I mean, there's a lot, that's quite a laundry list, right, of things to deliver on, but doing deals is like getting your driver's license. You know, you'll do lots of lessons and you do your test and you get your license handed to you and you go, great, I can drive a car. You never want to speed. You never want to have that license taken away from you, right? Because it will stunt you and your mobility. You won't be able to go to your girlfriend's house, etc. Right? So we take a very I guess conservative approach to doing transactions so that we never have that license taken off us, and so that's really important. So the hardest part is actually finding the right deal and doing it at the right valuation and lining everything up around it.
Maybe especially in the early days when you were CFO or early days of... Well, CFO is kind of more interesting. Can you tell us the biggest mistake you think in decision-making that the business made that you got away with? That kind of, in the end, didn't really matter. You got over it, but looking back, you're like, God, that was the wrong decision to make, looking back at that.
Yeah, great. I mean, there's a few. How much time we got?
Keep going. I think they're the most interesting, right?
Yeah, I agree, because they're all the learnings, right?
For sure.
Yeah. So, look, I think that whole strategy I mentioned to you before, I mean, that came from learning. And back in, it would have been 2010, we would have been listed for maybe 12 months or so. We decided to acquire a part of a business in New Zealand. And we put a lot of time into diligence and we thought it was a great business. We completed, right? Closed the transaction, completed. And first board meeting Greg comes back with the budget numbers, and the budget numbers don't line up with the financial model that we just bought the business off the back of. And you go, well, yeah, we could do two things right now. We could go, well, let's just deal with the vendors and try and negotiate a better budget outcome, and hopefully in 3 years' time the business will get to the point where it was supposed to be. That's plan A. Plan B is we're going to rescind the transaction. We'd already told the ASX that we were doing it. It was our first transaction, and we could rescind the transaction and get our money back and walk away. We chose the hard path. We chose the path of, no, we are not going to work with these people. The whole bit about values that I mentioned before, we're going to go down the hard path. And we did. We went down the hard path. We told the ASX we're going to rescind the transaction. We're going to get our money back. And that was a really hard call to make. But, we made it. And it turned out to be a good decision. And we learned a lot from that.
I always tell startups not to expand into New Zealand. They always think it's such a good practice for global expansion. And I say, I've done it twice. It doesn't work. HighPages actually did it really well.
Kogan have done pretty well.
I know. So occasionally it works, but I keep telling them, no one ever listens to me, by the way. They all go and do it, and they're all like, I say, you're going to get paid in, we don't know, New Zealand listeners. If we do, they're going to.
Plenty of New Zealand.
Well, not after this. So basically you get paid in pesos because the value is so low of the currency. And it's like, it's got a bad economy at the moment. It's a real struggle. It's like the size of one state in Australia, but you have to commit to it as if it's a whole separate country. I just think it's a very hard market to expand into. They should have just become a state of Australia. It would have been a lot easier. That definitely lost us all our New Zealand listeners. Absolutely. And hello to all of our Kiwi listeners.
I totally agree, and that's why we're not there now.
Yeah, it's very hard.
It's much harder than people think.
Yep.
Cam, you look at your business, it's just an incredible position now. You're growing your market values, your profit, everything's grown significantly. I think feels like the only thing, in my mind anyway, the one thing that could potentially stunt this incredible growth and this incredible business, and you look at the great businesses get something from less, it's just a step change. So from horse and cart to car, using the example. So do we have a faster horse? No, we're going to have a car. And for me, in your business, it's self-driving cars could be an interesting step change. And you look at this Waymo, and we'll talk about this in a future episode, but Waymo in the States is getting some really big traction. It's sort of doubling week on week in San Fran. It's almost 100,000 people using it a week. My view is in 10 years, and I could be completely wrong here, I'd love to get your view. In 10 or 15 years' time, it makes sense for everybody to be driving self-driving car.
Is Waymo a service? You don't own
Waymo's
the car?
The Google
but you don't own the car.
No, it's like an Uber. It comes without a driver, essentially. Yep. So if you've got the majority or everybody using self-driving cars, presumably there's much less of a need to transact in cars. So who knows the structure. Am I completely wrong there, or is that a potential existential threat to every kind of car seller and by implication you guys?
Yeah, I mean, I guess only time will tell when it comes to that. I mean, look, I think with self-driving cars, would I own a self-driving car myself? Yes, I would. What would I probably do with it? Well, I'd make it drive me to work, and then I'd probably make it go around picking people up and dropping them off and making some money out of that, right? And then come and collect me back in the afternoon. I mean, that makes good commercial economic sense, potentially. But I do probably about 10 to 15,000 kilometres a year. I'd imagine in that scenario I'd be doing probably 50. I'd sell my car now every 5 years. I imagine if I was doing that, I'd sell it every 2. So I guess so for one, do people substitute car ownership with using a platform? That's the first question. We won't know that until we get there. Second question is, does the velocity of ownership change over time as well? I guess we won't know that either until we get there. I think the industry's at a super exciting point at the moment. There's so much going on. Everyone thought back in 2017, 2018 that 50% of all new cars on the road by 2027 were going to be EVs. And I don't think we're going to get to that point anytime soon. So, I think there's a lot of things that stand in the way of complete self-driving cars, but will we get there? Absolutely. It's just a question of when, and what does the model look like? None of us know.
And I think, we always talk about incumbency. And the thing is, I mentioned Ray Itoe earlier on, who bought the Sanity business off Brett Blundy. And he bought it because Brett wanted to shut it because it was going to be displaced by digital media. And it was going to cost whatever it was, $15 or $20 million to shut. And Ray went to Brett and said, I'll take it off your hands. I think he made him put $5 million in for stock. And in the end, he said, he made a ton of money out of that. And he said, Brett was right. Like, it did have to shut down because it got disrupted. He was just 16 years too early. I got 16 years of money out of that business before I had to shut it down. And I think, the power of incumbency and the time lags of disruption are always underestimated.
The classic story there is Cam's old mob at Census, and there was still, I think PE now largely owns all those yellow pages, and they still cream it profitability-wise.
It's crazy, isn't
Scott
it?
Galloway invested in the US one. He talks about it. They make a bunch of money because they just cut a bunch of costs out, and people still the yellow pages still exist.
What are people using for? Sitting
God
on
knows.
For the kid to be higher at the dinner table or something?
Who knows? But there is still a yellow pages exists out there, which is remarkable. I think we'll better wrap it up. We love having Cam on the show. What a superstar he is. Done an unbelievable job at CarGroup, formerly CarSales. Still carsales.com is your website. We love the business. We love you guys. And thank you so much for having us today.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Cam. That's great.
Thanks for being here. It's been a pleasure.